Welcome back to another episode of the Dynamic Leaders Podcast. I am Colin alongside Jamie Huffman, my co-host for this podcast. If it is your first time here, thank you for listening. If you are a returning listener, thank you for coming back. The best way you can support us moving forward, leaving a review, preferably on Apple Podcasts. That seems to get the most traction, but that's seriously the best way to spread the word outside of our social media networks, our word to mouth ability to spread the show. So if you like us and want to support us and you have a minute, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. And we're going to get into a featured conversation with Zoe Almquist, who is the head coach at Davidson College for their field hockey program, here in just a few minutes. But before we do that, Jamie and I have our housekeeping to get through. We're going to share with you a couple big wins, and then we're going to talk a little bit about mistakes that we've made in the past, and we'll tell you a little bit more about why we're talking about that topic here in a second. But Jamie, I'll start with the big win, or whatever kind of win I guess I want to classify it as this week. I successfully had, pretty much a full week of beach time. Well, I did have a full week of beach time, not a full week off. I was definitely working, but definitely got to enjoy as much of the beach as possible. It was a little bit cooler than last time I was there around the Labor Day week and weekend. So it made it much easier to get out with Stella and stay a little bit longer and just be able to get back to work and do the things that I needed to get done. So it was really nice to have that flexibility, get the beach time. I was certainly antsy to get back home, get back into more of a regular routine, but I know it was a great week. My mom got to spend a lot of time with her only grandchild, and she has 5 brothers and then had 3 boys. My 2 brothers and I. And so she's been waiting for a girl for a long time, and she's in between jobs right now and has some extra free time. So was able to stay with us that week. So it was nice giving her, a lot of time with Stella, because I know that she hasn't gotten a ton of that time with the pandemic and them moving and everything. But I would say that definitely made me feel good. I was antsy to get home just to get back in my regular routine, but I'm feeling good now because it's been a few days, got back into it, and I'm feeling pretty good.
That's awesome. I know you had an awesome trip, so I'm really excited for you, and that's really special that Stella got to spend so much time with your grandma. So awesome. So my win of the week is that I actually have a puppy restarting training on Friday that had to get sent home early. And when we get into our topic, I'll dive into that a bit more, and it'll become apparent why it's such a huge win for me. Sorry if we hear a ton of noise today. I'm trying my best to keep them quiet, but one of my contractors has a COVID scare, so she had to stay home. So it's just me managing them all today. But if anyone's new here, it's not super uncommon to have dogs or babies crying in the background.
Yeah, definitely not uncommon. And wow, I didn't know you were going to tie in your win into what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to let you go first for this topic then, because you kind of led us into it. We wanted to talk, beforehand earlier today, I was talking to Jamie and I said, in this conversation with Zoe, what's coming up here in just a minute, we talked so much about process focus, like staying process focused and not worrying so much about the outcome and how that can lead to really great things. And it made me kind of reflect on, especially in my entrepreneurial journey, some of the mistakes I've made along the way. And I know Jamie is also in her own journey, and I feel like she's about to tell us a story here in just a second, but that's kind of how we got onto this topic today. So Jamie, go ahead, take it away.
All right, I will start then. So obviously I have made a ton of mistakes in my entrepreneurial journey so far. There's no cookie cutter mold that works. So it's a lot of trial and error, like everything else. But I'd say my biggest mistake, which was just kind of a freak accident that happened so far in my training, was one night I was carrying a puppy down the stairs and I slipped and fell. And the reason I'm telling this story too is because it was so devastating to me, and I couldn't have felt worse. The puppy ended up getting injured. She broke her leg. But I want to be transparent with everyone because there was, no negative intentions there. It was just a complete accident. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes our mistakes are things that maybe we could have done differently or learned something and prevented in some way. But this really wasn't the case. And a lot of good actually came out of it. I learned a lot about just, how to structure my contract a little differently and all these things. Obviously, I worked with the family that had pet insurance, which is awesome. Now I require everyone to have pet insurance because, accidents do happen. I have contractors on board now, and I want to make sure that people know, like, if a mistake happens, I've seen it happen in animal welfare with fosters and stuff too. Sometimes things are bound to happen, and it's okay. And we want to support our owners through that. And I want to support my contractors through that. So it gave me kind of some insight on how to structure things, how to communicate with owners. And from that accident, I told the family right away. We were on phone calls. They were out of town. I took the puppy to an emergency vet. We were in contact with other vets throughout the way. So since then, they have referred me multiple times. I've actually had 3 bookings from them as a result of how everything was handled. And that was a lesson in and of itself of like, no one is perfect. It's really okay. Once a mistake happens, like, how do we move forward? How can we be as, accommodating and understanding and, as good to the owners as possible in that kind of scenario and to ourselves. So that puppy is actually completely healed now. It's been a few months and she is restarting her training on Friday. So that's my huge one of the week. I am so, so excited to have her back. And I am just so grateful for that family, for like them showing me so much grace and understanding when it happened. They were nothing but kind. I ended up getting a concussion from it. So they were so concerned, not only about their dog, but about me too, which meant the world. I know not everyone would have that reaction, but it really taught me to forgive myself a little faster. And it just is part of it. Sometimes mistakes happen in any process in life. But that was a big one that I've made with my business thus far. And that actually had a pretty positive outcome. She's all fine now and gets to restart. And I got some referrals too from them. So it's been a good learning opportunity for me.
Wow. That's an amazing story. Obviously, sorry, what happened to you and the dog, but glad you're both rebounded. And I appreciate you having the vulnerability to share that story as well. And I really do think it illustrates pretty nicely what we're talking about in terms of how learning from your mistakes during the process help you get the outcome that you're looking for, right? Like, you obviously didn't want to hurt that puppy and you made a mistake, you owned up to it. It helped you evolve your business to protect you from mistakes in the future that things are going to happen. It helped protect dog owners too a little bit in the future as well. And it ultimately gets you closer to having a more consistent outcome, right? Like, more consistently, you're going to get to that outcome now. So yeah, awesome. Really, really great example. I was joking beforehand that my example sounded, in my head at least, pretty silly, and it's definitely going to sound silly compared to what Jamie just shared with us. For me, I think the biggest mistake I made in terms of the process was just getting too caught up in quantity over quality. Especially when I first started out as an entrepreneur, like, I just always thought I needed to be busy. I needed to be doing something. And I think about like those times today and I'm like, how did I have time to do anything else? Like, to put work into anything that actually mattered, because I was just sending, hundreds and thousands of emails and calling people, and some good came out of that. I made a few connections and everything, but for the most part, it was a pretty empty exercise. And all it did was it just proved that I could send out a lot of emails, but it didn't prove that I could build relationships with people. And like, ultimately, my business is so based in the foundation of relationship building, not just like to acquire customers and clients and people to help, but in the work that we do when we talk about leadership and we talk about building a culture. Like, how many times, people who listen to this podcast, have you heard me talk about being relationship focused? So I think that was something that it was probably a lesson that it's one of those things where I just needed to do it in order to learn not to do it. Cause I think I had people tell me I didn't need to do it, but it was like, you see the hot pan and you're like, the waiter tells you don't touch it and you end up touching it anyway. You just need to feel that it's hot yourself. And that's kind of how I felt about this. Certainly I'm much more relationship focused today in my approach. That means I talk to less people, but the people that I do talk to, it's a much deeper relationship. And actually one of those relationships is with Zoe, who we're going to hear from here in a few minutes. So I think that was why it was on my mind and why I was even thinking about it, is because, I don't know that I would have had the opportunity to have as much time and learn as much and get to know Zoe as well as I have, had I been operating in a different capacity. And I hopefully that's a lesson, people won't have to do it to learn like I did. They'll just be able to listen and, move on from there.
I love that example. I don't think it's silly at all. I certainly have been learning that lesson as well of, okay, I don't need the most dogs, or I don't need to reach out to the most people. Like, I want to do a really good job with the ones I have. And sometimes that means, less dogs or even sometimes less income, but it means I'm more proud of what I'm doing and I'm more fulfilled in work. And I think that's important. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that one.
Yeah, it's got me thinking about, and we won't go on a tangent about this, but I saw a local grocery store in the Charlotte area was cutting hours, and part of it is the labor shortage. Part of it is I think just work in general during this whole pandemic is really being rethought in the whole 24/7 aspect of everything. Like, it's just not sustainable, and it's not smart either. And I think a lot of our mistakes in the entrepreneurial world at least come from us trying to be a jack of all trades, trying to be on at all times. I think both of these examples that Jamie and I shared today were just classic trying to do too much and not taking a step back. So hopefully they have been learning lessons for you as listeners, and you won't have to repeat the same mistakes that Jamie and I have made. But let's get into my conversation then here with Zoe Almquist, again, who is the head coach for the Davidson College field hockey team right here in the Charlotte area. Awesome conversation. Zoe was a standout field hockey player at Northwestern, also an assistant coach there, where she won a couple Big Ten championships before eventually making her way down to Davidson. She's super into culture, super into leadership, an amazing leader herself. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So buckle up. Jamie and I will talk to you soon. And thanks for listening to the Dynamic Leaders Podcast. All right, I am here today with Zoe Omquist, the head coach at Davidson College for the field hockey program. Zoe was a standout player at Northwestern, then spent a handful of years as an assistant coach at her alma mater before coming over to Davidson. And Zoe, I want to talk about leadership to start our conversation. And one of the reasons I want to talk about it, I know it's super interesting to you, and you and I have had multiple conversations around it, but your leadership journey, at least from a title standpoint, goes back to your senior season at Northwestern, when as a player, you were voted team captain. I'm curious, being able to fast forward now and know who you are as a person, do you think that your leadership as it stands today reflects what you were doing as a player? And if so, what were some of those great qualities that you have as a coach? What were some of those things that you maybe were ahead of your time as a player? Maybe some of those things that you were like, oh man, I wish I could have done this better when I was a player.
Yeah. Well, Colin, thank you first of all so much for having me on today. I'm just really, really excited to be here and to have this conversation with you. But, I think when I think about that leadership journey and some of those qualities, I think my leadership journey started before I was a senior captain at Northwestern. I think it probably started when I was not a junior captain at Northwestern. And I do think that matters, because at the end of the day, so much of what I build my own leadership style and my own leadership experience around is both the moments where, it's out there in the spotlight and it feels like it's going in the right direction, and the moments where maybe it's not going in the direction that I anticipated or I thought that it might go in. So I think absolutely those experiences as a player and the time that I spent as a player have shaped who I am and the kind of leader I am today. I think that one of the things I like talk to my players now about is that developing as a leader, like it is so much more about the labels that go into it. And it's so much more than just like, kind of the outcomes. It's the journey, and that process matters. So, taking those steps, figuring out how to be a leader as a sophomore and junior, not as a captain, but then as a senior when I was a captain, and then transitioning into, I graduated college and I started as an assistant coach, like legitimately 2 weeks after I graduated, with all of my teammates, including an athlete who was in my class. So I had to go from being her teammate to being her coach in a matter of overnight, essentially. And that was quite a big transition. So I think I tried really hard to rely on what I knew to be true about my character and my personality and those areas that I was strong in. And then also have some honest conversations with myself about areas where I needed to keep growing. And that is the journey, right? That's being keyed into the journey rather than just worried about the outcome. And I think it helped shape the place that I am today.
So you wanted to be in a leadership position, like that was something you were striving for when you were a player? That's a really good question, because I don't know that I specifically wanted to be in a leadership position, but I thought that perhaps the work that I was putting in would lead to it, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so I think I was not explicitly disappointed not to be in a leadership position as a junior. I just think that there was probably an opportunity for it that I missed out on. I didn't do some things that I needed to. And so those for me were learning moments to like move into that role then as a senior, and be able to appropriately, like take on some of those new responsibilities. I think if I hadn't taken those steps as a junior, I wouldn't have got there. But I'm naturally not extremely comfortable in front of groups, much better in a one-on-one situation. So like being a captain, like I had to figure out a lot about how to speak to like large groups and appeal to broad audiences. And of course that applies right now every day in what I do, right? I'm a people pleaser. I'm a yes man, right? Yes woman. And so I think, what that means is I want to, if I can, make everybody happy. And the reality of being a head coach is you have to make a lot of really hard decisions where everybody is not happy. And that's one of those things as a player, I don't think I had figured out yet, right? I just kind of wanted to be like, do things the right way and lead by example and be everybody's friend. And I was hesitant to hold people accountable in the ways that they needed to be held accountable. And it's certainly one of those areas that I think continue to grow in, and specifically like think back in those times like, wait, what did I need, and what do my teammates need in those moments? And how can I best deliver that now that I'm a coach? Even with then not being super comfortable in a leadership position in front of big groups and everything, someone saw an opportunity in you. And later it seems like, you realized that this was something that you could take on as well too. I imagine you come up across this all the time as a coach now, identifying that with your players, saying, oh, I could really see her getting into a leadership role, but maybe she doesn't know it yet. Maybe I need to coach her up. Maybe something needs to happen to let this person know that opportunity exists. And that is, something that makes you even more valuable potentially as a player and as a teammate. Is that something that you're now comfortable with, being able to have those conversations around people, be like, I was in your shoes once. Like I didn't necessarily know or even want it. But it was something that I grew into. And I think you can do that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I first accepted the job as an assistant coach at Northwestern, I thought, well, what 21-year-old gets offered assistant coach position at a Big Ten school? Like, yeah, why not? But I'm not going to be a coach. I don't plan on being a coach. I'm just going to test this out for a couple of years, and then I'm going to go get my real world job. Right. And that was like kind of the way that I approach it. And then you just sort of like walking into it, and you're like 5 years in, and you've won a couple of Big Ten championships. Well, not me personally, but our team, I've had that opportunity to be on staff while that's happened. And it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go out there in the real world, and I'm gonna do, this other job and see what happens. And so I think at the end of the day, in my mind, coaching called me. Like, I tried to walk away. I did walk away. And for sure it brought me back, and it brings me back every time. And it's always the people that bring me back. And I think a big piece of that probably is leadership as well. And so it's not to say that you can't like learn to be a better leader. But I think some of this probably is a little bit of a calling. And so people did give me those first opportunities. I remember as a senior in high school, I would like go over after our games and help the head coach of our JV team. And she would turn to me at halftime and say, "Oh, Zoe, what do you think about this?" And the first time it happened, I was just sort of dumbstruck. Like, I had no idea what to say. And I think, after those early moments, that was coaching, and I didn't even know it was coaching. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I thought I was just like hanging out with the freshmen. I think that was in my head. That's what I was doing. But there I was being mentored, by this person who's still in my life as a role model in my life. Like, and I recognize the power of that. I recognize the power of that opportunity, that then turned into, a position where I could be successful on my college team. I was given the opportunity by my teammates to be their captain. I was given the opportunity by my coach at the time to be her assistant. I was given the opportunity to come in as an assistant for another program for UMass. After I'd kind of stepped away from Northwestern, and all of those people who are primarily all still in my life, I recognize there's no chance I would have been where I am today without the doors that others opened for me, for sure. And so I think as a coach and as a leader now, I see my role as helping open the doors for others. And so I'm always on the lookout for, well, what might be her super strength? Where might she go and make the best impact in the world? And each brand of leadership is different, and each person's like what they're meant to do is different, and finding that kind of calling space, right? I think it depends. And so I think, for me, I'm hoping that I can be that one that opens the door. And then I see it as the responsibility of our athletes to be able to walk through the door themselves. So finding that line of like, yep, let me open this opportunity for you. And like, I can see where this is going to go, or this could go if you're ready to develop. But then, sort of being willing to like sort of wait and watch and watch them walk that, because I know that also people for me open those doors and watch me make the mistakes along the way. And if I hadn't done those, there's no way I would be where I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everything that you just talked about. And I think the biggest piece, whether or not you're the one opening the doors, or someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to be a leader on this team. Like, I think I can, do some really," like you said, it doesn't matter if they're not willing to put in the work. And I think that, sometimes too much blame gets associated to a coaching staff or an individual coach to say like, this player, wasn't able to turn it on from a skill standpoint, or this player never grew into the leader. And, I think at the end of the day, the accountability piece from the individual. And, that's what I've really observed, with your team in general, is a general accountability that, everyone's generally aware of what's going on. They have really great self-awareness for being so young. You're 18, 22, you're trying to figure out a lot in life, as we both know. And, I think that's a special quality. Like, is that something in your recruiting process when you're trying to find those people, who are self-aware, who can hold themselves accountable? Is that something you look for in the recruiting process, to see if they have that piece already? Is that something you are coaching when they get onto campus? How does that work?
I think both. I think absolutely I look for leadership qualities in our fit, kind of in the off the field. And we talk about that as being like a team culture fit for us. So I always talk to kids about, okay, like, yep, hockey, there's a basic standard and expectation of where we want to be, and we're looking for the best players possible. But at the end of the day, a lot of times what differentiates kids is kind of that, some of those other intangibles. And so, is absolutely something I look for. And I ask kids all kinds of questions, to try to figure that out. And I watch them and I listen and I see how they interact with me, how they interact with their peers. I talk to their coaches. I, watch them interact with their parents. All those things help kind of give me information about, are they going to be this person who sort of drives their own experience, and are really sort of the driver of their own boat. And like I see my role as helping them steer, right? I provide that framework, that structure, and I'm helping them steer, but they have got to drive it. And so I look for that, all the time in the recruiting process. But then, like you said, right, they're 18, 19, right, 20-year-old. There's a lot of mistakes that we're all supposed to be making. Like, I think in college, it's probably one of the times of the biggest growth in any 4-year segment you take in your life. I think college has got to be one of the areas of biggest growth. And so the only way I think that we do grow is having the opportunity to make mistakes and learn and figure it out. And so both, yes, I think people that are really successful in my program are people that are self-aware and are willing to be in charge of their own destiny and, and can make decisions for themselves. But also my job as a coach is to help give them the tools to figure out how to do that. And, one of my mentors in the sport said to me, well, what are we trying to do as coaches? At the end of the day, as coaches, we're asking our kids to be able to walk away making good decisions. And that takes practice, just like anything else in life, right? So just like we practice our physical fitness, we have to practice our mental fitness. And as a coach, that is well within the umbrella of things that we work on too. So.
And I, again, love where you're taking this, because it's making me think about trying to find balance. And, maybe this is a societal thing, but you and I both have Big Ten backgrounds, and, Northwestern maybe isn't up to par with Penn State on a year-to-year basis, but in football, they've had, some good seasons, and the expectation, even I think in a sport like football, is that everything has to be perfect. You have to win every single game. If you don't, you're not going to get to, where you're trying to go. And, to bring it back to what you said, I mean, these are 18 to 22-year-olds. They're going to make mistakes, and they're probably going to make a lot of mistakes. And so bringing it just, I guess, to the question of how do you're as a head coach, I'm sure, your expectations and the things that you want out of your players, that bar is set really high. But at the end of the day, these are just people. And so how do you balance not burning someone out or alienating them because the expectation is too high to quote unquote be perfect, when we all know that that's a recipe for disaster and it's not attainable. And so but we want people to get better. Does this make sense, what I'm trying to get at here?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer to that is imperfectly. How do I balance these expectations? And it's a process for me too. I on this team in particular, I think it happens a decent amount when you work with student athletes that are high achieving in the classroom and also, on the field. People do have high expectations for themselves and each other. And I think as a coach, remembering that is important, remembering what it was like to be in their shoes. So setting really clear expectations and this is what we expect, but never do I set out, I expect perfection. Right. And so I think that's a good place to start. And then the other thing is I model imperfection every single day. Right. I tell them when things didn't go as planned, when there was a little bit of a dropped step here or there. And my goal in that is to remind them that we are all human and we are all living this experience together. But I do think it's an extremely challenging line to kind of walk. And one of our team mottos, or one of kind of the pillars of our team culture is resilience. And it's not perfection, right? It's also not even excellence, right? It's just resilience, because we know that we're going to fail all the time. And what shouldn't matter is that we did fail, but what does matter is how we respond after that mistake or that failure. So I think we talk about that all the time on our team, and it's a reminder. And in football, I guess maybe you do have to play a perfect game, and there is some expectation for a perfect season and things like that. And I think there are ways to, walk through that. Like I think about COVID this last year. I know my alma mater football team made it through the entire season with 0 positive cases. Like who does that? I don't know. So they figured out a way to be perfect, and they also went to the Big Ten championship. Like, so I know that that's possible, but like, that's not normal. That's not really what we're looking for here. I think we're looking for excellence and we're looking for growth. But those only come from resilience. So when we look at top field hockey programs in the country, the top field hockey programs have like an 80% possession rate. So like in other sports, maybe that's completely unacceptable, but in field hockey, 1 out of 5 times we touch the ball, we're expected to turn it over. That tells us that like what we do after the turnover is way more important. And that applies completely off the field as well. So resilience, in my mind, like keying into that understanding is way more important than like, kind of getting people really mentally focused on, hey, let's have this moment be perfect.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, you're talking to a baseball guy where the success rate on offense is 3 out of 10 times traditionally. And any other sport that is, or anything in life, it's unacceptable. And so I totally get what you're saying. And I love that and I know you have your mathematics background, so I'm not surprised that you went there with that. But, what it's reminding me of, when you're talking about the resiliency of it all is what you had said earlier, that it's not necessarily the outcome. So like the failure is the outcome, right? And so if we're not going to focus on the failure, the resiliency piece is the process. That's really what we're talking about here. Like, how do you keep your kids on the team focused on the process, knowing you have team goals? I'm sure you have individual goals with your players as well. How do you keep them focused on that process on a day-to-day basis when, like right now, we're recording this before you even play a game this season, and there's a lot of romanticism in sports where, like, before a season starts, everyone thinks that they're going to accomplish what they set out to do. And we all know that it obviously doesn't work out that way most often. But, I'm just wondering, how you're able to keep them focused on that process and not lose sight of, what that maybe long-term outcome or goal might be.
Yeah. I mean, I think we try to make our goals manageable and like chewable on a day-to-day basis, right? If we get caught just only looking for that outcome, it can be really challenging to know whether or not we're moving in the right direction. But if we can keep in mind and keep that perspective of like, what am I trying to achieve today and right now to be able to get where I'd like to go? So, as a team, when we build out our goals, we start big picture and then we work our way down. And then I think, but how do we stay focused on that? We explicitly talk about it. Like, what is our big picture goal and why are we working toward it? And today, why are we working toward it? And so I think remembering our why, bringing us back to the big picture, and then at the same time making those day-to-day goals manageable and kind of chewable, help kind of keep us grounded. It helps me like stay grounded, I think, and like ultimately, what am I trying to do at the end of the day? And yes, absolutely, the outcomes are great, but they're a piece of the puzzle and arguably one of the smallest pieces of the puzzle. If you do everything else right along the way, and right again doesn't mean right the first time, it means you get it right. I think there's that there's like a quote or a saying, right, that says something along the lines of, if it's not finished, if it's not fixed, then you're probably not all the way through the journey, So I think that reminds me too of resilience. It's like, it's probably, if it's not where you want it to be, you're not at the end of the road. So like, just keep going. That by itself is enough motivation for me. And sometimes it's enough motivation for the team, but I just have to keep being creative about figuring out when it's not, how we keep communicating that.
Yeah, for sure. And the journey is such a great word to use in all of this too, because the journey is like, all right, so you say you win whatever level you're trying to get to in your sport for playoffs, and you achieve that. everyone knows, like 10 years from now, you're going to be like, all right, yeah, that team won. But what people don't know, like what you hear at weddings and what you hear, when everyone gets together, is those stories about everything that went into that moment. And so I think that's a really cool way to think about it, is that, those are the things that you remember the most. Like you said, that outcome just ends up being such a trivial piece aside, everything else that happened.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think the magic comes in those little moments for sure.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'm super curious how you managed that teammate to coach relationship. And I know that you said there were some things you had to figure out about yourself, but I don't know too many examples of this happening. I know it probably happens more than I can think of off the top of my head, but really the only big one I can ever think of is Joe Girardi, who was manager for the Yankees, also played for the Yankees in the mid to late 90s, won a few championships, and then was a bench coach, in the mid 2000s. By 2008, he was a manager, and the core players for the Yankees were still on the team at that point, including the person who took over for him at his position as catcher. And it was mixed in terms of how he handled it. Some of the things he handled really well. Some of them, very publicly known, did not go so well. But I can't imagine being in a situation like that where it is just a totally different mindset, I feel like, that you have to have in order to do your job. Like when you're a player, you're thinking more about the other players, I'm guessing, right? And when you're a coach, you think, not that you're not thinking about the players, but you're also thinking about things that the players never even consider. And so, how did you go about managing that? Did you enjoy it? Like, did it turn out well?
I mean, I think it turned out well, and that I am, kind of where I am today. So clearly it worked on its way. And, my first season coaching was 2011, and the first Big Ten championship we won was 2013. So okay. For me, I don't know, maybe it goes back to staying connected to that process and like where we are in this point in time. And I sort of approach it as, okay, well, I know that I have a specific role to play, right? As a player, I had a specific role to play, and my job was to play that role to the best of my ability. It wasn't to be anything that I was not. And then as a captain, it was the same thing. It just, my role, the labels on my role were a little bit different, but I was still expected to be me and the best version of me. And then when I was hired as an assistant coach, I thought, okay, well, like if I hop up on some sort of like authority stool here, right, I'm in trouble. Like that's not me, and that's not how I function. So I just need to continue to be myself. And so, I credit, I think, to my teammates turned team members, right? They were really great with the transition, and they were really supportive. Credit to my coach turned boss, because she was also extremely supportive and extremely confident. And I think in like my ability and opportunity to develop, so in the springtime, when I sort of like knew that I was going to be hopping on the team, but I hadn't graduated yet, I was doing for class credit an internship as like a student assistant coach. And I remember the first time she sort of just tossed me out there, like we were doing stations in practice, and she sort of just tossed me into a station. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I just have to figure this out, I think managing some of the off the field stuff probably was a little bit more challenging, in that a lot of my relationships with my friends changed a bit. They had to, right? I had to be a little bit more arm's length. Things had to be a little bit more professional than they had been previously. But I think that's a natural transition. I think it happened on a less intense scale when I went from just a player to a captain. It happened a little bit from a player to assistant coach. It definitely happened in transition between an assistant coach and a head coach. But it happened in transition, like relationships and friendships, they change over time, right? That happened. You might have experienced this becoming a parent, right? Like some of my friendships changed when I became a parent as well. And so in a lot of ways, that transition from player to assistant coach, like it prepared me for the way life exists in seasons, regardless of what you're doing. And so, being patient with yourself and giving yourself grace in that time. And I hope that I did that to the best of my ability at the time. I think helped with that transition a bit as well.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have a couple more things here before I let you go. I'd love to. So, you were part of 2 Big Ten championship teams as an assistant,
Yeah,
correct?
as an assistant coach. Yeah.
I would love to get some takeaways from you in terms of, what stood out from those teams that made them special, that, you were able to, because again, you weren't perfect. I'm assuming that either one of those seasons. And so just would love if you could give us some key takeaways, some of the great things that you remember from those journeys that maybe people can take away from this conversation and hopefully apply to what they're doing.
Yeah. So I think, and I'm going to toss in a third championship in there, in that when I was assistant coach at UMass, we won the A10 championship, and we went on to the NCAA tournament as well there. So those 3 championship seasons, they all taught me, I think, so much. I think I'm trying to think of maybe some of my best takeaways. I think one, realizing and recognizing the magic in the moment. And when I start to spiral in my own head, right? I'm a math major. I'm a thoughtful person. I go over things and over things. My mom always tells me that I perseverate a little bit too much, right? I'm intense and I'm stubborn, right? So all of those things, I can start to kind of spiral a little bit. But when I think about those seasons and what the teams did that were successful, it was, all of us had a sense of the magic of the moment that we're in right now, and that staying present within our own role and our own shoulders, and owning it to the very best of our ability. Like, even if we have, say we're an 80 out of 100, if you give 100% of your 80, that's so much more productive than having the capacity to have a 95 and only giving 72%. And so I think for me, like, on many of those, I can pinpoint different moments in season where things would go wrong and people would just not panic and realize that again, I feel like a little bit like a broken record, but it's a stop along the way, and recognizing that if we keep going and we're true to who we are, like, that the outcome will decide for itself. And I think that intentionality and that magic in the moment was super positive and important. And it's not even the moment that we won in any of those situations that really, like, strikes me so much as the process. In fact, the first Big Ten championship, which was in fall of 2013, we went into the weekend before now, and I don't even remember specifically who we were playing, but I think it's possible it was Penn State, and we needed to win that game to stay in conversation for the Big Ten tournament, and we lost the game. Like, we could not stand up to the pressure that was necessary. We had gone in, we had all these wins, and we lost the game. And we sort of felt like, okay, well, we blew it, basically. And then we went to our final weekend of play, and we beat whoever we played in that final weekend. And there was another team, I want to say it was Penn State, Michigan, and they were playing almost simultaneously with us, but their game ended a little bit after ours. And so I remember, as a team, we all went back to the locker room to watch it. And for whatever reason, we hadn't talked about it that much. We just knew that, okay, there was this game, but we hadn't really talked about what are the possible outcomes that could have come from this. And, for me as a math major, I'm usually thinking about that. But because this team was the team that kind of really stayed in the moment, and yep, we messed up, the weekend before, but we took care of business today. And then after we took care of business, okay, well, let's go watch what happens. And we're all sort of starting to realize, oh yeah, the team that we need to win this game is winning this game right now. And if this game ends, we're going to also have shared this, and it was a shared Big Ten title. We're going to share this Big Ten title. But it wasn't until legitimately where we were watching the streaming, I think, that we all sort of figured it out. And I do think that speaks to just kind of staying in that space, and kind of where we are right now. So I know the next year when we won the Big Ten tournament, the team we had to play in the first round, we had lost to 2 weekends before. And so again, it was okay, it's not a perfect journey. It's never going to be a perfect journey, but you have to be ready to go when the opportunity presents itself. And that was the moment. And that first round game that we won in the Big Ten tournament was the first round game in the Big Ten tournament we'd won in about 10 years, maybe 20. It was a long time. And it just shows you that you've got to stay tuned into where we are. And the big stuff follows.
Do you think, as a final follow-up to that question, with those teams, just knowing how special those individual seasons were, again, looking back and reflecting, like, are you able to see the buildup to that now, like in the seasons previous to that? Like, did you see the pieces start falling into place, like those moments? Maybe they didn't happen as consistently as they did in those championship years, but did you see the work, being put in? Because I think the reason I'm asking is a lot of times we all, again, focusing on the outcome, we just focus on that championship season. We forget about the work that went in the 3 seasons prior to that, and the build up and the lead up to it all. So, like, did you see those pieces falling into place beforehand, especially now that you're able to reflect? I can't imagine that they were just kind of like one-offs, that they just happened.
No. I mean, I do absolutely think that there was a ton of buildup and lead up. And I think you're right that it extends well beyond the single season that you're experiencing, at the time. Could I see it coming each time? I don't know. It depends on the year. The year at UMass, yeah. I feel like as an assistant coach, I, walked in like literally after preseason began. That's a whole nother story. We don't have time on this podcast, but I was on my honeymoon, not planning on coaching, and was sort of called up to be in this position. I walked into this team and it was essentially just like hit by a wall of collective understanding from every single player on that team. Like, this is what we're going to do. And there's absolutely no one, even this random assistant coach, standing in our way. And like, that was really cool. And it was one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever had as a coach, was just realizing the power of athletes all on the same page and believing the same thing. So from them, yes. From the Big Ten championships, I do not think they were one-offs. I think it was a result of a ton of work that was put in and a ton of preparation. But in the moment, like when things started, I don't know. I didn't know. I definitely didn't know. I think it wasn't until there was some of the hiccups along the way and we recovered from them, right? Typically in season, there's a point where the wheels sort of start to come off. And in hindsight, as a coach, you can always look back and be like, that was the moment where it just sort of fell apart. And those championship teams we would cross that moment where normally things would fall apart and people wouldn't. They would figure out how to pull themselves back together. And those are the times where that then you're headed towards something special. And it happened on all 3 of those teams. It wasn't necessarily the initial moment. It was after the wheels came off that they put them back on. And so I guess as a coach, like, ultimately that's what you're hoping to try to like prepare for and train for and give your athletes the tools for, because it's probably not the coaches at the end of the day that are going to put the wheels back on, it's the players. And so that's, I think like game day rolls around for me and I'm like, well, this is my least pressure filled day, because the work that I could have done, like everything that me as a coach I can give, like I've given. And at this point, then our players are driving that. And when they're able to take responsibility for it and get back up and roll again, that's how that it's a championship team.
Very cool. And I know, obviously, as we just talked about, you've experienced a few of those as an assistant coach, and you're ready to get it now as a head coach. And by the time this episode comes out, you'll be on your way to hopefully achieving many of the goals that you have set out for this 2021 season. But Zoe, really just thank you so much for taking the time today. Everyone, I'll put in the show notes a little bit more about Zoe, the field hockey program. Definitely check it out. But I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.